So that's kind of where we're going to pick up in 7. This is right before he starts approaching Pharaoh. Okay, so let's read 1 through 7. Before I do that, let's for a second imagine that you're Pharaoh. You're in control of all this land, production. You have a workforce out there. Someone comes to you and says, I need you to let all those workforce go. How would you respond to that?
No, absolutely not.
We don't have unions in this country. We're not doing that.
I mean, think about how long, we covered this a little bit last week. Think about how long things have been going like this in Egypt. 400 years. Okay? People are working there. These are basically the trade people. They're the ones that built and completed things. These people were very important to the Egyptian life, these workers. Now all of a sudden some guy comes in there, some stranger, and says, it's, hey, Yahweh says I gotta let my people go so we can go worship him. And you know, we give Pharaoh a lot of flack for not letting them go. Do you blame him? So let's look at it.
I do blame him.
Okay.
Because it's one thing if God comes to you.
But he doesn't know this God. He hadn't seen this God. They have not seen this God in 400 years.
But God made himself known to Pharaoh.
Not yet. Not yet he hasn't. He will, but not yet.
I think it's interesting that they came as shepherds, and they were hated by the Egyptians. They were even told, don't tell them that you're shepherds, because they hate those people. And yet, over time, they've taken over all these different aspects of the country. They have all this power and authority, and they have people who've given them great wisdom. So they've changed for Egypt in a lot of ways, and they've become central to who Egypt is. And now they come to them and they say, I'm not doing this anymore. We've got to go for 3 days.
Yeah, and that's all they asked for was, let's go worship for 3 days. So think about this. Egypt had a population of about 10 to 12 million people at this time. The Israelites made up about 2.5 to 3 million. That's all 25% of their population. Okay, now let's make this a little real. The U.S. has roughly 300 million people. Imagine 75 million people. Someone comes to the president and says, we got to take 75 million people out of the United States and we're going to send them over to somewhere else. How hard would that be for a president to come up and say, oh yeah, you can just go. And by the way, there are plumbers, there are electricians, there are builders, there are all these trades that these people belong to. What do you think that does to a society? It does. So it's hard to blame Pharaoh at this point why he said no.
It could have been better. Like, he did forced labor. I mean, if you're the owner of a company, you don't force labor your employees. You be kind and you be generous, but this guy isn't. So there's evil in his heart.
No, yet I'm not worrying. I'm not at that point yet. We're going to get to the evilness of him. And God knows his heart. But it's hard to blame him, though, initially as to why he said no. Honestly.
Also, he doesn't, as he said, as Danny said, he doesn't know God. He doesn't have a sense of the profound or the sovereignty of God, or that there's anybody that he ought to listen to. He could care less.
Well, he's God himself. He is a God. Okay? So for someone to come in with a God he doesn't know and then try to put some kind of authority over that, that is also a declaration, almost kind of like of war, of, hey, you're challenging me, kind of a deal. So it was on multiple fronts of where this Pharaoh is kind of being attacked. Because when you have that many people leave percentage-wise, it will take decades to come back from that. I mean, it would set the U.S. back at least decades if that were to happen.
Isn't that the case with the Jewish population that we lost? They're just now getting back to the numbers that they were.
From the Holocaust.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So starting off, have a little compassion for the Pharaoh. Not saying keep it, but I mean, you got to kind of put things into perspective when we get into these stories to say, well, what is the real ramifications of what they're dealing with here?
Well, and Egypt was one of the top powers at that time, so he's definitely not used to, he's Pharaoh, so he's not used to people telling him what to do.
Yeah.
And going against, saying no to him and stuff, so all of this is new.
Absolutely. Now, and I'll repeat this also. Pharaoh didn't know the God of Yahweh. It's been 400 years from then. The stories weren't passed down. I'm sure he probably didn't remember who Joseph was and what the promises were that were given to them. And that if Pharaoh did say yes to Yahweh, he probably would have still blessed him somehow, in some way, to continue thriving. Because we saw God do that in Egypt anyway, you know? So,
It makes me think when we expect people that don't know the Lord to act like they know the Lord, it kind of makes me think of that.
absolutely.
I can't put that on someone who doesn't know the Lord because they don't know the truth.
Yeah.
Our job's to tell them, but their behavior is not going to look, you know,
Anything like the Lord.
yeah.
Or what the Lord expects. Yeah, that's why I think when you're talking to non-believers, pointing out the sin in their life is probably not the best tactic and way to go. You know, let God do that. Our job when we share is just to share Jesus. And that's why those people standing out in the streets or standing out saying you're going to hell because of this, or think of Westboro Baptist Church, or what a horrible ministry. So, okay, I've set the stage. Now let's get into 7. 1 through 7. Who'd like to read that?
Okay.
Okay.
Then the Lord said to Moses, Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh because of my mighty hand, and he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country. God also said to Moses, I am the Lord.
Are we in 6 or
Oh,
7?
7.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep. No, that's okay. I thought, wait a minute.
Let me get back to them. Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment I will bring out my divisions. My people, the Israelites, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh.
Okay. Before we go, what questions or thoughts do you have on this chapter or in this section of it?
Is this the first time that Pharaoh's heart was hardened? It says, he said, God said, I'll harden his heart, but I can't remember if there was a previous time.
Yeah, when they approached him the first time, God was hardening his heart then. Because they came to him saying, let people go, and that's when he put all of the hardship on Israel and things like that. It started then. Yeah, good. Any questions on anything that's being said in here?
Well, it reminds me of Proverbs 21:1, which says, the king's heart is like channels of water in the hands of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes.
Absolutely. So who's in charge of the rulers?
God alone.
I love
Sovereign
how
God.
he tells Moses that he just lays out, this is what's going to happen. Like, he just knows. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Script.
Yeah.
I say.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the sovereignty of God. He knows things.
Yeah.
Okay? He knows how things are going to happen. You know, the very first verse, I had to stop and go down a rabbit trail. Why don't you bring me something?
No, that's not for you.
What do you think the very first thing that popped in my head when I was researching this?
Made you like God.
I made you like God to Pharaoh. What in the world is he talking about here?
I can't tell if he's
Symbolic.
using Moses as a mouthpiece, like making himself known, are saying to Pharaoh, you are no more than a man.
So if you translate it, it goes, I set you up as Elohim to Pharaoh. As Elohim.
Well, I think it made Pharaoh fear him and awe him because any regular man who walked in and say what he said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh would have to kill him.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting to your point, that we were talking about this last night. It doesn't say like a God to Pharaoh, it says Elohim, like what you said. So he's trying to say there's one God. I mean, that's one thing, but made you like God, and why would he tell him that? Because I think through the wonders he's about to do through Moses, so Pharaoh's going to look at him like that.
Well, Pharaoh was considered a god.
Yeah.
So, you know, he would kind of see the works that God's going to do, that Moses is going to tell him, and he's going to say, wow, this guy's got power like me and all my people.
Yeah. So he's doing a lot of things by doing this, and that is definitely one of them. He is setting Moses up equal to Pharaoh's eyes as equals now. Okay? He is not becoming a god. Okay? He's setting up, he goes, you're going to be a representation of me to Yahweh. Because it's not Moses who speaks. Who speaks through Moses? Aaron. Aaron does all the talking. Moses is kind of back here. So you have a mediator who is acting for God. You have Moses back here. God's giving revelation to Moses, passing it to Aaron, and Aaron is the one sharing everything to Pharaoh.
But it's also like Christ before Pontius Pilate, or Christ before the Jews, because he's God, and they could care less. They reject him totally, and that's what Pharaoh's going to do to Moses and Aaron.
Yeah, and I think Aaron more represents John the Baptist. He's paving the way. He's more of the mediator between God. Okay, remember, Moses is a representation on some levels of a lot of Jesus, and we're going to get to a little more on that here in a minute. So when we start putting the whole picture together, because this whole event of the plagues is a small picture of something to come, okay, on many levels. So keep that in mind. So we have to look at the picture. So now we have Moses, who really is a prophet in a sense. What is a prophet?
Someone who
Mouthpiece.
prophesies that the coming of Christ is.
Mouthpiece of God.
Yeah,
It is not wrong.
absolutely.
That was the future.
So that, I mean, it's not just that, but yes, they do that. What they are is they are a communicator giving revelation from Yahweh. It could be current, it could be future, it could be all, whatever the case, however God wants to do it. But when you are a mouthpiece from God, you're hearing from God and you're sharing what God has shared, a prophet. Okay? Because a lot of times, prophets bring warnings, prophets bring truths just that are going on. So it's a pretty big picture. So there's a mediator that Aaron is going to Pharaoh. So this is how he's setting himself up as God, because Moses doesn't even say anything. Okay? So that's kind of how he's setting himself on level playing field. God is saying, I know what's going on. So let's get going, because I'm putting you in honestly in Pharaoh's place. Okay? So he goes, I'm going to set you up as gods, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. I meant to say Aaron was the prophet, not Moses, by the way. You shall...
I'm sorry for interrupting. However, can we point out that one key difference between Moses and Pharaoh in the description of calling them God? Moses was able to perform his miracles by himself directly, and Pharaoh could not do that. He had to call magicians.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Get a little ahead, but yeah. And really, it's not even Moses doing it. God is working through Moses and Aaron. But we'll get to the magicians here in a minute, because that's a whole other topic we're going to get to. So then he goes through, and this is how it's going to go. You're going to be I'm going to speak all that I command you. Your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the sons of Israel get out of the land. He goes, but I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart with stiffness that I may multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. So he's even telling Moses, this is what's going to take place. So don't be dismayed or have your heart broken when he doesn't come through. Because it's signs and wonders. That means there's going to be multiples of them, okay? And then he goes, my people and the sons of Israel from the land of Egypt by great judgments. He's even telling them this is going to get ugly. He says, this is not going to be good, but bear with me because they will be let go. Then, and keep this in mind, this is the whole purpose. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am Yahweh when I stretch my hand against Egypt and bring out the sons of Israel from their midst. He wanted Egypt to know who he was before they left. So he was revealing himself in a way they probably didn't want that revelation of God. But it's hard to imagine that he would do something like this, but it's foreshadowing, like I said, another event. What event is it foreshadowing?
Separating the wheat
from the chaff. When does that happen? Tribulation. When you go to Revelation, this is kind of a foreshadowing event of something that's to come. He will do this again with his people. The Egyptians are Gentiles. The Israelites are the Jews. This separation is going to, these events to some degree mirror Revelation. Not fully, but they do mirror it. So we'll get more into that as we go along. So they did as Yahweh commanded. And so Moses, when Yahweh commanded them, this is what they did. Now Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. Holy smoke.
Cool. No retirement.
With God, there is, when you're working, we're not talking about work here. We're talking about ministry in our work, in what God is calling us to do. There is no point in time where I ever say, well, God will just stop using you for you to sit down in the ministry. God can use you whenever he wants to use you. And until he takes us home, we need to be open to it and open to him and doing what he tells us to do. Okay? So anything else in that? There's a quote by D.L. Moody, though. Quote, Moses spent 40 years in Pharaoh's court thinking he was somebody. Then he spent the next 40 years in the desert learning that he was nobody. And then another 40 years showing what God can do with someone who found out he was nobody. So, pretty neat little quote. All right, let's read 8 through 13. Who want to read that? Thanks, Brady.
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said.
Okay. Questions? Thoughts?
In Timothy 3:8, I think he talks about the names of these two magicians who appeared before Moses. And now you know why he's going to act like Elohim before Pharaoh, because God did the same thing to Moses, turning the staff into a serpent. And Moses did that to Aaron's staff. So he changed, commanded, and the same thing happened. So now he's acting like Elohim before Pharaoh to show him what his power is.
Power, yeah, and absolutely.
One thing for sure, and that is that when Aaron's staff swallowed up all the others, there should have been an indication that Pharaoh is on the wrong side.
Absolutely.
God hardened his heart.
I mean, it was a miracle that the staffs turned to snakes. Mm-hmm. It's a bigger miracle that this one snake gobbled up the other snakes and then turns back into a staff. Okay, this is a big sign. And it's a sign of what's to come. He's telling them this is what's going to happen to you. Okay? So how is it Well, let's first off. So here's who the Pharaoh summoned. He summoned wise men, sorcerers, and magicians. Wise men are wise. This is how it's the word is hakam. I'm probably saying it wrong, but it means wise, cunning, skillful, shrewd, crafty, and subtle. Sorcerers, kashaf, means witch, witchcraft, also words used to whisper a spell, to enchant, and to practice magic. And magicians are hartam, it's diviners, magicians, astrologers. This is who he brought around him. How were they able to do this? Staff to a snake.
I'd say through the power of Satan.
Anybody have any other thoughts on that?
No second thought, and then the power of the evil.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know, maybe God let them become snakes because he knew his snake was gonna eat them.
So you think maybe God had a hand in that?
Yeah, well, he has a
I
hand.
mean, he allowed it. I mean, definitely.
He wants to show his supreme
So one
power
of them.
again. But I mean, like to quote what Paulus said that, like, these are depraved minds, like 2 Timothy 3:8. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so also these teachers oppose the truth. They are men of depraved minds. No use, even though you have all the skill sets with elite degrees and scholarships.
Yeah.
Still a depraved mind.
No, absolutely. Okay, so one idea is it was through the power of Satan. So it's through demonic activity. One of them, maybe God has kind of granted this and just, said, let's play a game to some degree.
Well, obviously those sorcerers, they're just like, let's just throw, they're used to these things happening. They're just like, let's take a rod and throw it down, and the thirst turns into a snake, ours will do. They've had to have seen something like this before to even contemplate, like, well, yeah, we can do that too.
Okay, so
I'm saying they have to be dabbling in this more. Dabbling might be the wrong word, but there's an expectation that we can produce the same results, because you just don't wake up one day and
think you can just throw a staff into a snake.
So there's an expectation there.
Yeah. No, there is, and I think that's why they didn't hesitate, that we know of. They didn't hesitate. Now, there's also the belief that this was a sleight of hand, that they kind of just did a little David Copperfield trick and made it look like that. Okay. There's also this theory out there that these were actually kind of stiffened snakes that were used as rods, which I'm telling you, this is kind of crazy. That they threw them down on the ground and then they kind of unstiffened whenever I'm like, yeah, right, okay. We're going to take that one completely off the table. What I believe is happening, much like what y'all are saying, this is a demonic practice. They practiced in demonic realms. And we remember when we went through Genesis, there were multiple gods throughout the land. This will not be the last time that the enemy uses magic, deception in this manner. We're going to get more into that a little bit later, but just keep that in your mind, okay?
Would also be one other possibility: you take them out of the freezer and put them in the microwave, and then they come alive. There's a deception going on. Some of these guys, like David Copperfield, is completely fake, but it looks real. So there's a deceptive aspect of it. And I always like to. I have to, in my own mind, when I think about this, fast forward it to now. Because we're in a world in which what happened then is going to happen now. It's going to be totally different. But we've got these people that are doing all kinds of really depraved things in our society. And God is going to reveal that as being depravity. And as time goes on, we get closer to the tribulation, they're going to try harder, and He's going to show them up for who they are. And we're actually beginning to see all of that happen now.
And it's going to be bigger than what you're saying, too.
Yeah.
So anything else in this section before we read on?
It's not a magic trick.
Yeah, it wasn't a magic trick.
I was just gonna say, why do we doubt Satan's abilities?
Mm-hmm.
He has these abilities to disguise himself, deceive, but God shows himself as more powerful than him, so.
Yeah. And remember, this tactic that he's doing is no different than anything else that he's done in the past with God. Satan's idea is to discredit God in everything that he does. He's tried to discredit him in creation. He's tried to discredit him in marriage, in our identities and who we are. I mean, this whole male and female thing, God created male and female. Now Satan is attacking all this. We know in Revelation, we're going to see an unholy Trinity. We're going to see an antichrist. Everything that God does, Satan is going to try to undo or reverse or do something like the deception of some kind. So here God is working. Satan comes along, I can do that too. This is no big deal. Okay? So let's move on. 14 through 25, who would like to read that? Okay. Thank you.
Then Yahweh said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going out to the water, and station yourself to meet him on the bank of the Nile. And you shall take in your hand the staff that was turned into a serpent. And you will say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But behold, you have not listened until now. Thus Yahweh says, By this you shall know that I am Yahweh. Behold, I will strike the water that is in the Nile with the staff that is in my hand, and it shall be turned into blood. And the fish that are in the Nile will die, and the Nile will become foul, and the Egyptians will find difficulty in drinking water from the Nile. Then Yahweh said to Moses, Say to Aaron, Take your staff, and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, over the streams, and over their pools, and over all their reservoirs of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone.
Okay. We'll get to the actual event here in just a second. So we're coming to the first plague. Any thoughts or questions on this before we move forward?
That's deep.
What the actual plague?
Turning all the water to blood, killing all of the fish, stinking out the river, everyone knows how critical, severe, obvious that blood is something that God, that we humans can't live without. God uses that to cover over our sins. To me, that's so spiritually deep, so whew.
Yeah.
And if you go to Egypt, if you've ever been to Egypt, it's a total desert if it wasn't for the Nile River. I mean, it would not exist. And here's this incredible river. And it's everything. It's the most powerful thing. They make their lives out of it. They go up and down. It's their transportation. It's everything. It's gone. It turns to blood. It destroys Egypt.
Why do you think he chose the Nile first?
I want to judge every god they worship, and he chose that. Because that's like, water is everything, right? That's a primary, so just imagine a day without water.
Well, it's their life source, right?
Yeah.
It's their commerce source, their
Yeah, it disrupts everything.
freedom.
Yeah.
I mean, and this affects everybody. Okay, this was their source of, because their crops and everything came from this, because it talked about all the little tributaries and things, everything that came from there, all of this was turned to blood. Not just that, but all of their vessels of stone and wood were actually turned to blood as well. It was their drinking water, because the Nile is fresh water. So everything like that was destroyed.
And only God would be able to fix that, like a sorcerer could make water look like blood, but they probably couldn't undo that.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to find out. They can do certain things, but they can't undo. Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, just like God said to Moses, it makes Moses into God. Because God gives, God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. It's gone.
Yeah.
Just like Moses did it.
Absolutely. So let's back up just a second, because we're going to get more into this Nile thing, because I want to look at what a plague is. And the word the plague uses is nega, which is a term to indicate a state of being stricken. It's almost like a boxer hitting the opponent, with a hand and just, not knocking him out, but giving him a good just a good punch is kind of what has happened. Now, this is a big one, don't get me wrong, and I'm not trying to belittle what plagues are, because the last one is going to be the knockout punch, if we're putting it in boxing terms. Okay? So each one of these is going to be a huge blow to Israel, or to Egypt. Okay? As we go through this, there are 10 events that happen, as most of us know. Really, if you want to get to 11, because there's one more at the end of all of this. I wouldn't call it a plague. The first 9, though, you actually can break them down into 3s. Okay? So you can break each one down into 3s, and in each plague, group of them, the first 2 he gives a warning, the third one comes without a warning, in every one of them. So it's Moses approaches, warning, Moses approaches a warning, Pharaoh fails, boom, it just happens. So kind of interesting that God uses this pattern to kind of teach Pharaoh a lesson here, and he does this through all of them. But so getting back to kind of the Nile, what happened when the first Pharaoh was trying to kill babies?
Did he dump them? No, Moses.
He told them to. He said, "You go dump them in the Nile, because we're going to get rid of all the babies, all the Israelite babies, and throw them in the Nile." You remember that?
Yeah, and God says the innocent blood cries out to him, right?
Yeah. So God is taking this first one, almost, I think, kind of saying, you know what? I remember what you did to my people. I'm going to take out your Nile. And the blood that you shed in there is going to come back, and it's going to come back on you. So God doesn't forget. Okay? Now, there's a lot of people, well, we'll get to that here in a minute. Some people will say this. So it's estimated that this occurred around the 14th of Nisan, because if you kind of take everything and you back up to when the Passover happens, we're getting out to the 14th of Nisan. And around this time, it's late winter or early spring. Crop plagues give us clue that also the timing of everything that's going on. So this is all done in timing of everything of what God is doing until we get to the thing. So you can actually take all the plagues and time them, that this whole event is going to take around 10 to 12 months. This was not like a boom, 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 boom kind of thing. There was enough time to kind of pass because crops had to grow. All these things had to take place. So they're guessing it's roughly around 10 to 12 month time frame. Okay? Let me see here. What else we got? Got that. In each plague that we're going to go through, there is a god involved. I put up here, this is the first god that they attacked with the Nile. There's 2 of them. There's the Hapi, which is the Egyptian god of the Nile, and then there's Sobek, the crocodile god of ancient Egypt. Okay, so keep this in mind as we go forward. Let me see here. Where am I at? He says he's going to do this, and what I find interesting is what he tells Moses and Aaron to do. What does he tell Moses and Aaron to do whenever Pharaoh says no? God didn't say strike it, which I find very interesting. God just says raise up your hand. Later on, we're going to see Aaron strikes it. Okay, it's interesting. So let's go ahead and finish the chapter because I want to kind of get into the rest of this. So 20 through 25. Let me read this. So Moses and Aaron did thus, as Yahweh had commanded, and he raised up the staff and struck the water that was in the Nile, in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the water that was in the Nile was turned to blood. And the fish were in the Nile died, and the Nile became foul, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. And the blood was through all the land of Egypt. Yet the magicians of Egypt did the same as their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened with strength, and he did not listen to them, as Yahweh had spoken. Then Pharaoh turned and went into his house, and he did not set his heart even on this. So all the Egyptians dug around the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile. And 7 full days passed after Yahweh had struck the Nile. Okay. So things happened, went just as well as God said. Aaron strikes the water with the staff. And then what happens? Okay. There are going to be people who will say that these are all natural events. There are skeptics out there because one of the things they say about water turning to blood is what's called the red tide. Okay. There are some people who think the word blood that's used there is blood-like. And that's why I'm saying all of this, okay? God is very specific on what he means and means what he says. It was blood. It was not just a blood-like idea. They will say that a natural occurrence of a red tide, which is a microorganism in the water that turns the water red. Okay? This is what science does.
Well, there's several interpreters of the Bible too who don't believe in miracles.
That's it, yeah.
So they have to come up with
A solution.
natural explanation of everything.
That's exactly right. So here's how you combat that. Okay, this happened on command. You could throw everything else out of the water. It happened on command. This does not happen on command. This takes time to build. Okay? So we don't really even have to say anything at all other than it happened when God said it happened. Okay? Man cannot produce this. So do not let man try to put natural events into any miracle that God performs. When we get to the Red Sea crossing, you're going to hear all kinds of things. Okay? We'll get to that, so just hold on. Okay?
That stinks, by the way, red tide.
It does.
In St. Petersburg, and they get red tide in Tampa Bay all the time.
And it's destructive.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I can see where some people who don't want to believe the Bible does this. When I was thinking about this, well, let's go on to the fish of the Nile. Okay, there are 168 species of fish in the Nile. One of the big one, or one of the, is the perch. Okay? It's called the Nile perch, or now it's called the Goliath perch. Here's a picture of it. Here's one that was caught. 440-pound perch. If you're a fisherman, perches are about like here in this size. What I'm trying to draw that this is, and they get 200 pounds easily in this river. So when you're thinking about when a river like this turns to blood and it kills the fish, we're not talking small fish.
I'm talking about Chick-fil-A.
Talk about big old.
We're talking about monsters. And you think a small fish smells, think about this one. We were fishing one time at a lake, and we had no business fishing at this lake because right across from it was like a power plant. And we weren't going to eat the fish or anything like that, but it was funny because we were fishing, and one of my buddies goes off to the edge by himself, and we're just sitting there just fishing, we're just having a good time. And next thing you know, all of a sudden we just, a dead fish, a catfish, was on the shore, and the smell just kept hitting him, and he was just dry heaving as he was trying to fish, and we were hearing this from a distance. That was one fish. This is not a river of fish. What else is inside the Nile?
Crocodiles, everything.
Crocodiles. What can crocodiles do that fish can't? They can escape. Imagine that. Imagine you're living in Egypt when you know a river is infested with crocodile. They got to go somewhere. And they are. So this goes deeper than what we're even told here. This is nasty. Okay? And here's the other, and the reason I brought up this God here, because they actually held the crocodiles up as a god. There was a god for the crocodiles. They held them to esteem. And we know this because here's something that they have uncovered under archaeology. Mummified crocodiles. There's actually museums for this. So they held them up to a standard, and there was another god, that god is what they were attacking. It was what God was saying, I'm bigger than your little crocodile god.
Well, that would be fearsome to see all those coming out of the water. Those things can move fast.
They can, and they get big.
Is there, so you were saying estimated 10 to 12 months all this was occurring. Is there any writings or anything that indicate what, okay, these things have like a a plague happened and then what life was like. Is there any kind of indication what life was like?
No, there is evidence, though, of something happening. We'll get to that one when that plague happens.
Okay.
Okay?
I think there's like some hieroglyphics that they
Well,
all
yeah, I
these
mean, I'm
places.
just wondering, like,
They don't, this is not documented.
yeah, well, I just wonder, like, what, okay, you know, obviously something happens like this, and then there's
Ramifications that can.
society, so like for a month or so, then, you know, disruption of work, or,
I don't know if it would be worth it. You might have to look at it from like, even in Jewish historical texts, because we have some friends that celebrate Hanukkah. And when we celebrate Hanukkah with them, or, you know, they always refer to this, these plagues. So perhaps there's something in Jewish writing about how their life was when they were in captivity. Might be a place to look.
This is what we have. I mean, that's all we know.
The pharaohs like to go in and wipe out whoever was before them, so they wipe out all the hieroglyphics and everything, so the later, they may have documented it and later pharaohs wiped it out.
Yeah, it's possible. And I mentioned this earlier in Egypt. Egypt does not like documenting things that make them look bad.
No.
So they will get rid of documentation. There are steps in history that we have no documentations of Egypt because of that reason. So the only, of course, we may is maybe the Israelites, but we do know a little bit. I mean, Moses documented it for us.
The Egyptians are well known for historical revisionism.
Yep, absolutely.
Are there hippos in the Nile as well? 'Cause they're also aggressive.
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't say, nothing I read said that, but I don't know. I can't say yes or no. It's definitely something to look at. So I say that all this because this is big. And so you have all of this happening, this smell, this ruin of life, where all their water comes from. How long did this happen?
At least 7 days.
7 days. How long can man go without drinking water before he is?
48 hours.
3 days. You go 3 days without drinking water, and that's about as much as you can handle. And that depends on how active you are. They went 7 days without it. So this wasn't just water being turned to blood. It wasn't just about the fish dying in the thing and stinking. If there were people who didn't get enough water to drink, lives were lost during this time with the Egyptians. So this goes throughout the land, okay? Now, Jewish belief, because if all the water goes to blood, where do the Jews fit in all this? Do they not drink the water?
Yeah.
So are they affected by this?
Yep.
So did they die?
Hopefully Moses gave them a warning, pre-warning it was going to happen.
Go fill up your yeah. No. Well, so the Jewish belief, if you go read some of their historical documents, they actually say that God protected them through this, that when they drank it, they weren't affected by it. I can't corroborate that. It's just one of their thoughts of what they teach their children when they're going through this.
Anything on a state
But we do know-
water.
We do know some of the plagues, which we'll get into, that the land was only local in that area. I mean, the night or some of these coming up here pretty quick. So I don't know. It doesn't record it here, but it may not have been infected up there either.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I find it very interesting. I think it's very possible God protected them through this because that was his people. And when we go through and look at Revelation, because when we go through the whole tribulation times of all the things that happen in Revelation, who is the tribulation affecting typically what we teach?
Non-believers.
Non-believers, and who else is there?
What do you mean?
The Israelites.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay?
Non-believers.
And if we find that God protects his people through tribulations. So it's not unlike God to maybe protect them through this while this is going on. So I'm trying to use, when future events kind of happen, what we see how God has transpired, it is very possible that he protected them, that by miraculous means, they were able to drink the water.
Like 144,000.
Okay?
Also, that shows he is God. I mean, that in and of itself, that one would be affected, and then right there amongst them, they're taken care of. I mean, that protection, provision, his might, power, that's, I don't know.
We might be reading extra a bit into it because God specifically is causing this scenario so that all the people can be removed from the situation too. Like even from a foreshadowing perspective, I don't think that's necessarily a foreshadowing other than what God has said it was. I want them free from Egypt. That I will take my divisions out of Egypt.
Yeah.
I think we gotta remember too, though, that God's protection doesn't always mean we won't die.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you look back at all the millions of Jews that were killed, but his purposes were to have a remnant that would remain and would come back, and Israel would become a nation again. So it's not that his plans were thwarted. Some people did have to die.
Yeah.
But that's still all within his plan.
Absolutely. Good point. Yep. Thank you for mentioning.
It says they dug along the Nile for drinking water,
Yeah.
so.
So let's get to that. So why did they dig along the Nile to drink water? How did that work? They couldn't drink from the Nile, but they dug in the sands of the Nile to drink water.
Sometimes isn't there like waters that
Yeah,
like
pool.
flow underwater
Yeah.
and stuff like that? It's not,
I'm- I mean, if you go to the beach and you start digging in the sand, water will start coming up. Sand is a natural filter.
Yes.
So it's very possible that what they were digging was water that had been kind of filtered through the sand, and it was just enough to give them enough to drink, by that means. So I find that very interesting. He's like, I didn't fully do this to you. I'll give you a little bit. You're going to have to work for it really hard. Okay? So, because it says they were able to do it. So God was gracious enough to give them something. Okay? Now, I also find it interesting of everything that's taking place. Because when you put it kind of into a bigger picture here, because this one, the first plague was water and blood. And really, if you want to look at it, the last thing that happens in tribulation with them in Egypt is the Red Sea crossing. And the Red Sea crossing is a foreshadowing, a picture of baptism, is what we equate that with, because they're crossing through the water and going into the land. I find it interesting because that's kind of like what sets them now off into their motion. They can put Egypt behind them and they're now moving forward to go get their land. Let's fast forward all these years to Jesus. There's a thing called a chiastic structure. Are y'all familiar? Y'all mentioned it a couple times in class. It's kind of like you have these ideas that crescendo to a point, and then it kind of comes back down, and that is all throughout Scripture. And really the reason that's important, because whatever happens at that point is what tends to be kind of the most important focal point that you take from it. So we're just going to use two: blood to water, baptism. What did Jesus do right before he started his ministry? Baptized. What was the last thing that happened to Jesus?
He got bloody. He spilled it. He shared his blood, or he ascended to heaven technically. But what you're after.
But last on this earth,
crucified.
he was crucified. What was the last act they did to him? They punctured his side. What came out? Water and blood. I find this kind of interesting. I don't know, it's just kind of a thought that I had. If this is a picture of Jesus, we have blood and water, baptism, blood and water, kind of a deal. Kind of interesting, I don't know, maybe reading too much into this, but I think it's interesting. Okay? So let's go back to these sorcerers.
I think you're talking about in Corinthians, like Paul writes that that's like a form of baptism, especially Red Sea crossing.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I think like in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 4, 1 to 4, it talks about the baptism, the Red Sea crossing is like a baptism. That's what Paul writes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And so is the crossing of the Jordan and several other things, absolutely. Okay, so now here's the interesting part. These sorcerers were able to do the exact same thing. But to the point, they can't undo it. Okay? They were not able to just stop what God has already been doing. So here's the thought that crossed my mind, and I put this on the email and everything. It's not just God who does miracles.
Absolutely.
So how do we discern godly miracles from false miracles? How do we know when it's God working and when it's demonic? Because I'm not going to sugarcoat it, because he still works.
That's the glory.
Yeah.
Who gets the glory? That's what,
Contradict his word in any way,
Yeah.
because if it does, it's not him.
okay, so you filter it through God's word. What else? Anything?
Well, worldly miracles, I think probably I'm getting in the same bucket as Vicky. The task doesn't depend on you, it depends on God's presence with you. And if it's a demonic task, it would look like somebody saying, I did this, look what
Oh,
I've done
okay.
for you. Like you'll be owing someone something, but not a miracle from God, it will be given freely.
Yeah.
And God's, what's the word I was gonna use? God's miracles reflect His glory, and then in turn we reflect that glory through the way we treat others, the way we treat circumstances around us. Then do we become fully trusting in God's word? Do we trust in His power and His might? And that's, when it's satanic, it's not pointing towards God. It's not pointing towards, God's glory. It's just pointing to Satan. And that, if you're a believer, you can see that for what it is. Or hopefully you see that for what it is.
So,
In Revelation, the Antichrist will perform. Even you see, that's where you're going.
The false prophet
Yeah, false prophet.
is going to perform mighty miracles during the tribulation.
Yeah.
He will appear to raise the Antichrist from the dead. He will appear to give an image of the Antichrist's life.
and even during the bowls and other judgments, because Revelation 16, 12 through 14. Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great Euphrates River, and it dried up so that the kings from the east could march their armies towards the west without hindrance. And I saw three evil spirits that looked like frogs leap from the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. They are demonic spirits who work miracles and go out to all the rulers of the world to gather them for battle. They are going to trick people into believing that they are the powerful ones, that they are the ones to believe because of the miracles they perform. These can be very deceiving to people, even Christians, if we are not fully aware of God's word, how He works, and the whole, even God's character. Because all what y'all said on how to discern this is all 100% correct. First off, you got to know God's word. At any point, look at the messenger. Look at the one who's doing the healing. What is their message like? Do they speak falseness? Are they the ones receiving the glory? Are they saying it's all about them? Are they distorting God's word in any way? If they do, you throw everything out that they're doing as demonic. Okay? Then it's like, what's the outcome of this? Who's getting the glory? Even looking at the people. Who's getting the glory from this? Because let me tell you, when they have those revivals that go on, when these mass healings and it just draws people to them, I will first and say God is still in the miracle business. And I will say I'm not going to take God out of those situations. But we have to be very careful on who we're following and who we're putting our faith behind when those events start happening.
There was a fella in Florida a few years ago who was completely covered with tattoos, and he got up and performed all kinds of signs and wonders. People came from all over the world to see him, and it was finally revealed that he was high on drugs, and he had several mistresses, and his whole ministry went down in flames. And what is interesting is that led to a major editorial in Charisma magazine, the magazine of charismatics, in which the editor said, I am absolutely convinced that when the Antichrist comes, charismatics will be the first to be most deceived because they chase after signs and wonders.
Absolutely.
Isn't that amazing?
That is.
Charisma magazine.
Absolutely. That's wild. So I wanted to kind of pause on this because it's this important. Because I do believe that as time goes on, we will probably see more of this stuff happening. Because there is a great deception that's going to take place. And I can easily see where signs like this could easily take Christians who don't know the word, who are not true followers of Jesus, who, I say that carefully, who are just kind of still drinking milk, can be easily just swept away.
I think it's important to listen to the Spirit, because how many times have you been confronted with somebody saying something, or you see something and it looks, man, that looks really cool, but then you just hear something like something's off, something doesn't feel right. So it's like, be aware of what you're seeing. So I think you gotta listen to the Spirit too when you're seeing things, because it will say, hey, be cautious.
Absolutely.
Watch out what tickles your ears.
Yeah. And that's why it's important for you to have a relationship with the Holy Spirit, understand how he talks, what his voice sounds like, because it's going to be even that more necessary as time goes on.
Well, you have, sorry to use a name, but you have people like Jimmy Swaggart. You have people who've had things that have happened in their life that are apparently godly, but then they fall, or they fail, or they want all the money to come to them, they use money improperly. So you have sinners who are charismatic in some sense, but who are very dangerous, and you have to be really careful about these people. They mislead lots and lots. Anybody that's gullible could be misled by those kind of people.
Oh, absolutely.
For example, I used to get letters from the Swagart ministry, which would say, "Dear David, I'm sitting here at my table in the kitchen thinking about you right now. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. David," and my name is used all through it. Those are produced by a computer. You just tell what name you want in it. And people fall for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a buddy of mine who said that he was watching this television program, and he said he called me by name on the television. I'm like, well,
Peter Papa.
his name's James.
When we talk about
Very common name.
there's God's way and there's the world's way, and that's what the difference between Christians is supposed to be. We should be operating from the Bible, God's way, and when we start eluding and pulling in the ways of the world, that's when we don't look different, and that's when you can't see the difference either.
Yeah.
Even in Jesus' time, people chased after the signs and miracles that he did. And when they said, we want you to be king and all, he said, no, and they left him.
Yeah.
My sister, a long time ago,
John 7.
probably 50 years ago, who's become a Christian, wanted me to go with her to a Catherine Kuhlman ceremony. And she was famous for being a charismatic person. And she got all these people up on the stage, including me and my sister. She just called these people up. And she went and touched these people on the head and kind of pushed them on the head. And my sister fell over. She was one of the people who did. I didn't.
That's because you were a pagan.
That's what they said. No, but I think you've got to be so careful, and I think people are so desperate to know what the truth is, that they get caught up in these things. And you just have to, if you know somebody like that, you have to pray for them, you have to talk to them, you really have to encourage them, like you said, get into the Bible, get into the Word, and Jesus is humble. He's not going to go around laying hands on people and pushing them over by a punch on the head. And,
That'd be a lot of fun, though, man. Come on. You gotta say. So, anyway, well, just know, and I'm not saying God does not do miracles, okay? He is in the miracle business still. So, you got to just test the spirits. We're even told to do that in Scripture.
Another big
Okay.
point, how many times did we see Jesus do miracles? I mean, there are only a couple miracles that were done in front of thousands and thousands of people. Otherwise, they were more, at least the way I read the Bible, and I'm very open to correction, most of them seemed much more in a smaller crowd, like a couple of people, don't tell anyone right now, or just between him and the woman at the well. Feeding up the 5,000, that was pretty big, but it wasn't like broadcasted on TV or something, you know?
Yeah.
Didn't make the newspaper.
Yeah, no, there's some validity to that as well, absolutely. Anything else in chapter 7 before we move on? Before we end?
So all these times, like the magicians are able to mimic what Moses did, so we will come across.
We'll come across that again.
Yeah, but that'll be a stopping point.
There will
that
be.
They cannot mimic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So read chapter 8 and probably 9 for next week. We'll cover some more of the plagues there. So